Welcome to Thinking Deeply About Primary Education, the podcast that gives you a peek inside the minds of some truly inspirational teachers. This week, I'm delighted to welcome the inimitable Matt Swain onto the podcast to talk about all things mastery. Matt and his colleagues have spent years refining their implementation of a mastery model of schooling, which draws on same-day intervention to amazing effect. We discuss what this looks like in practice, whether a mastery model is a realistic aspiration, and what we need to be aware of before traversing such a path. I have absolutely no doubt that you're going to love this episode. So without further ado, let's spend some time thinking deeply about primary education. It's great to have you here today, Matt. Thank you for joining us.
No problem. Morning, Kieran. Morning, everyone.
So we're going to jump right in. But anyone who's interested in Matt's origin story should check out season 2, episode 1. Because during that he discusses the step approach to supporting early career teachers. With the wonderful Tom Gary. The focus of this chat will be mastery. And so first off, what does mastery of primary mean to you?
I think there's a sort of a mindset shift, isn't there? I think McCourt talked about this in his 2017 book, which really made a difference to how I thought about education, if I'm honest. I mean, I've been educating children in primary at least for 13 years. I think 13 years now. And all have been really successful, or I thought I had been. So I sort of like the marker for that would be like your Key Stage 2 results. I'd started teaching in London, and I spent about 8 or 9 years in London actually, and in Wandsworth. I was very fortunate to work in Wandsworth for a large part of my sort of London career at least, and that's a particularly good borough for maths. Like it was, maths was done well in Wandsworth. I think it was like the second highest performing in the country at the time as an LEA. Back in those days, I was churning out really high numbers. I was a year 6 teacher. I'm really proud of that and consider myself a great maths teacher. And for a long time, I was really proud of that and all the kudos that came with it. Lots of people were very interested in the school I worked in and how we were getting these results, and they could watch you teach, and it was really exciting. How the DFE can watch me once. It was really quite exciting stuff. The marker then really was like how many kids are leaving at the percentage, a high percentage. And I thought, well, we're doing pretty well at this. I must be pretty good at this. And I was maths coordinator, so the people I work with, I'm doing a good job of making them quite good at it. But I think I read McCourt's book. Yeah, it was pretty much as soon as it came out, to be honest. And I'd always kind of had a sort of like a concern really around. I was in year 6, so anyone in year 6 will find typically that whether or not people, this may maybe not be the case in many schools now, but definitely for a long period, and hopefully you'll recognise this. So in year 6, it was your job to get them all across that finish line. And at this point, you'd often be facing the full spectrum of like 7-year gaps, and there'd be kids all along that. So you'd have X percentage, sort of where they need to be, and then another percentage working year 5, if you want to look at it that way, and then at 4 and 3, and then even some working really at year 2 levels. And it's your job to work sort of like miracles and to push them sort of across that line. And I'd always been really aware of this. Like, so as a year 6 teacher, what you'd also know was happening is that to do this, you'd need to remove time from children. Okay, so what you need to do is to get them to cross this line, to be successful, and I'd argue now it wasn't successful, but to be successful in the eyes of Ofsted, in the eyes of the governing body, and in the eyes of schools around you in the LEA, and to get those impressive figures, then you'd need to take time off children. Okay, so it wouldn't be enough to teach them really, really well every single day. This is one of the arguments I've got with the response to COVID, that people sort of went, well, we're great teachers, let's just teach them really well, and we'll close the gaps. They've lost about 1,500 hours of education. Like, let's go with the fact we're teaching really well before. Like, teaching really well again, you still lost 1,500 hours of education. That's, and I think that's what calculated to be roughly. Like, so that's just not kind of enough. And so what you have to do is add time. You need to find time, don't you? And we do that kind of in quite a sort of I don't think there's much thought put into it because of the nature of the education and nature of Ofsted at the time and the pressures around outcomes. Then there was no sort of, there's no ethics or morals in moral sort of like soul searching around just removing time from children beyond their maths lesson. and they'd, you'd be spending time within the afternoons. Instead of them doing art, they'd be doing extra maths. Instead of them doing history, they'd be doing extra maths. Instead of them going to, maybe their lunch times, not that they'd be doing lunch times, but anyway, the point being, you'd be intervening at the end of their journey to get them to where you wanted to be. So you had this sort of, so oddly, like we recognized even then that some children needed more time than others. Like we knew that but what we did is we gave them that time in this very short period in a sort of reactive way to issues that had arisen during their time with us. I don't know, you put these numbers out, and really high numbers, and we got lots of, it's really odd because you get lots of kudos for it. You get lots of people looking at you for it, and it's very easy to get sort of starstruck like that, going, I'm really great maths. To get some of these children to what was level 4 or then became expected standard, they weren't doing history and they weren't doing art. And I think I've spoken to before, I'm going to be talking about it again, is that, and one thing I learned in my maths was, where I looked at intervention in particular, was I interviewed children who were in intervention, and particularly in year 5 and 6 and in year 2, because I thought that's kind of where most interventions tend to happen, because they're in key stages. And what I learned from this, and the whole point, and I mentioned this before, we go over it again, the whole point of this sort of like this research around intervention was actually just to examine intervention. But what I learned was that these children were really unhappy, like that they were at the end of their time in school, and they were out of their classes and away from their friends for a large percentage of the day, because they're in a maths intervention, or they're in an English intervention, or in a science intervention phase that existed, and they were being taught in non-ideal spaces, and not always by the right person. And I was party to that, I was party to this happening. I'd be drawing up the timetables, and Harvey would be in maths in the morning, but be coming in early that morning for extra maths, and he'd be out in the afternoon for maths intervention. And all these things would be in place to get Harvey to level 4, and he'd come into year 6 and maybe like working at key stage 1 level. And the question then is like, were those interventions in place for Harvey? Like, or were they in place for the school? Because then you've got to ask yourself, now, and what I've really soul searched about is whether I was really doing that for Harvey, right? So we know about the effect of sort of cramming on exam performance, and then the fall away afterwards, and that's essentially what we were doing, and what we were guilty of, like I think many schools at the time, is cramming those children so they passed the tests that gave us the numbers we wanted, so we could tell ourselves they could now do maths, when in fact a year later they were back in bottom set in secondary in year 7, because it's all fallen away. And that never sat with me. So you've got this thing where you've got children that are losing time with their peers, sitting in hallways or rooms with nowhere near the resource anyone else has got, missing their curriculum. And since I've had children, I've got a little boy, 5, and a daughter, 9, who have been pretty fortunate enough to sort of like go into primary since the shift towards there being a wide and rich curriculum. We were doing all this, and we were removing time for these children and giving them this really sort of impoverished experience of school, which I would imagine would affect their impression of school anyway. School is a place they come into, and often they sit with adults, not pupils, and they can't talk to their friends about the great P lesson that day because they didn't do it, or the art lesson day because they didn't do it. And it may be a subject they actually could do really well in, and actually they wouldn't need intervention, and they were missing it. Deep in my heart, I kind of knew that we were just pushing these kids over the line. You know what I mean? We weren't really helping like the Harveys of this world. We were helping ourselves and our school, and no doubt that was in response to pressures around Ofsted and pressures around outcomes from LEAs and that was the culture, wasn't it? And so, like, despite all this, and despite this, I remember, I had the DFE come observe me. I remember this, like, with Nikki Ashton, who's an amazing maths teacher who worked for Wandsworth back then. I'm not sure she does now, but she was and she's the one who led the maths dollars on. And I remember the DFE came to look at me teach, and because as I think they're trying to secure funding for the maths, and and despite those kudos on what we're doing, and I worked for somebody. My head was an ex maths lead for the borough. It was all really exciting, but I think deep down I kind of knew it wasn't. I don't know if it was honest. If I'm honest, yeah, I don't think it was honest. I don't think it was fair either. I remember interviewing these children, just really bothered me. It still bothered me to this day. Really, I think it's bothered me that we were, and now I've got children. That what was right about that? What was right about taking all that time off them so late in their education and sort of disenfranchising them in the most important years of primary, really, ahead of transition, for grades that probably didn't mean weren't always worth the paper they're written on. Does that make sense? Like, if I'm honest, and if we're honest, if you cram a child through a test, have you really made them better at that subject? Maybe a little bit better? Or is that an honest description of where they're attaining? No, it's not. It just isn't. Anyone would know that. We know from I know from my own experience of cramming for tests that very quickly that fall away happens, straight after. And I read McCaw's book in 2017, and it just struck a sort of chord, I suppose. Like, I was like, he's not wrong, is he? Like, that our perspective, our framing of teaching mathematics is wrong. That, like, we know that these children that couldn't get it will eventually get it, even in a cramming sort of culture, if we spend enough time with them. And actually, the belief needs to be they can all get it. They can all do math, but it can't be the way we're doing it. It can't be this system. It's got to be a system where we keep them together, and that we have a better sort of setup for being more for getting ahead of the problem. Okay, so if we accept, which I think you have to accept, that some children need longer to learn little things than other people, and it's not always the same children for every single step. And that's the other thing to be really wary of, is that it ends up just being some children because the whole sort of the house of cards falls apart because we leave it too late. But all children at some point when they're learning something need a bit longer. That's pretty much, I think you can accept that. And in hierarchical subjects, like, and I know that's pretty like an overly used term, but I think we probably agree that mathematics is largely hierarchical. That if you learn whatever step you learn today, if you're not secured that, you're going to struggle with step tomorrow. And I'd also say it's the same with phonics. And whenever I talk about today in this pod, just for those that are interested in this, so Chris such his books out and talks a lot around this, but we use this exact same approach for phonics. When we teach phonics until year 6, because it's hierarchical, isn't it? Because like learning the code is loosely hierarchical. So I think thinking was like, okay, so what we need to be doing. I read that book and I reflected a lot. I think it's a Tom Gowrie phrase really, but like stopping the snowballs forming. So what we're allowing to happen is a small misconception snowball into a larger one, into a larger one, into a larger one, because it's unattended. Right, and at the point of the problem occurring in a maths lesson where a child, just has a misconception or misunderstanding around a small step in learning, we're not giving them the time then to unpick it. And instead, we're letting that snowball because it causes problems with the next lesson, and with that sequence, that entire sequence becomes problematic. And that's even within the sequence of learning you're teaching. So let's imagine, as an example, like the measuring of angles, okay, as maybe a sequence of learning, which I'd argue probably takes about 15 steps to really teach it. And so let's imagine the first step of measuring angles is to make sure they can that they understand how to place a protractor at the point of turn. Okay, that's the first thing you need to be able to do. I'd argue the second thing you need to be able to do is then use the clockwise scale to read angles, and then secure that before you do the inside scale, because that's the hard one, isn't it? That's when people about 65 to the 55. But had they not placed a protractor correctly and you just moved on, then everything falls apart. Because and you're focused on something else, and they won't catch up on the thing before. Right? So surely then, if we know that, and we accept that children need to spend more time, which we do because we've been taking it off them in year 5 and year 6 in huge chunks at the cost of their wider education and their own, I'd argue, mental health at times, then maybe we just get a bit smart about how we do that. And maybe if and I think one thing to talk about today, if we find a way of giving them more time at the point they've got the misconception, then you won't create the snowballs. And that was my kind of thinking. I kind of thought, okay, and I think a quite good analogy for this is kind of, if you read like Creating a Culture, like Tom Bennett's report on behaviour, which is probably one of the seminal things I've read actually. I know it's just a report, but like it really explains where schools get it wrong, and and I could be wrong here, but what it's saying in there is like reactive mechanisms, like sanction charts, and reward charts are what, are the thing that schools that aren't effective behaviour management focus on. They're dealing with the aftermath. And the most effective schools focus on getting ahead of the problem, spend time on routines and creating a culture and establishing strong relationships with children. And if you do that, then what you get is far less people like falling into these reactive mechanisms. And my feeling was, similarly, if you get ahead of these misconceptions, if you deal with them at the point of that they occur, and if the steps are small enough in teaching, and behind this is something we'll talk about, like teach subject knowledge, then that investment of a small time investment then stops a massive time sort of removal later, like that. And I've proven this over time like that. So I've got this, I know this is the case now. So what I do know is that making time for children at the point of error, it leads to making less errors and spending less time in intervention at any point in time, because you're just not letting things snowball. So what do I think mastery, I suppose, in primary is? I think it's a system that allows children the time they need at the point of learning to overcome any misconceptions and stay with the pack.
I think it was really clear, very strongly time came across as the most important factor. How that, we started almost bridge into how that might look. I think I'm always really struck by when you describe, the first time I heard you describe your sort of raison d'etre for changing the way you worked. It's a very powerful sort of story that you tell, because I was sitting there going, oh my goodness, this is both completely correct and completely shocking at the same time. How is this the way that we operate? So I think it's a really powerful reason for moving towards that mastery model that you guys have got, but also I think very clearly explained in terms of what are the key things we need in place.
If anyone listening is interested, it's okay, what does that look like? So I could probably just, if I just frame the mechanics of the day of how this works in our schools. It's a bit hard without slides, but I did have some slides to show you. But so what does that mean? I say, what do we do? And if I talk you through what this means for schools, that's probably kind of it, isn't it? So what we decided, and I was very fortunate, I joined Step Academy Trust maybe 5-6 years ago, I don't know when it was, like recruiters, teaching and learning lead for like East Sussex. No, I mean not East Sussex, just the schools we had in East Sussex. But they were all schools that joined the trust, as often is the case with trusts. There's, for whatever reason, not that effective, So there were either, I think the 4 in Hailsham, where we started this, 2 were special measures. 1 was double special measures. I don't think it's been possible, but 1 was, and the other 2 were the result of a collapsed trust. And I was asked to come there and help sort of support moving them on. And at that point, I sort of came in, and I think I'd been deputy head at school in Surrey. We moved that to a good place in my time there. I've been there 3 or 4 years. I didn't want to be a head. I knew that. I was always more interested in teaching learning, and I joined the trust. And really, I suppose the argument would often be that this is easier when schools are in the wrong place, and I completely agree with that. I think that, if you're a school that's current setup of like years 5, year 6 intervention and so on and so forth is getting children, 90% of children to standard, then it's really hard to argue why you should do this, right? Isn't it? Like, because it's a lot easier when you've got schools that you've got children at 40%, or 50%. I would say, I'm just going to make a little aside here, that the current, if we look at like key stage 2 attainment, and that's sort of 3 years of recorded attainment, and then the average is like 75%. I think it may have, I'm pretty sure it's the average. It's probably going up slightly, but the average over 3 years is 75%. Like that is shameful. That is all kinds of shameful. And so whilst I'm talking on this part, I'm going to argue that if you follow this approach, you'll never send 25% of children out of primary not numerate. That's an unbelievably shameful percentage. Because it doesn't matter what the odd school does that gets, we're doing really well. But if overall the average sort of like attainment is 75% making expected standard, that means 25% aren't. It means a quarter of children in this country are not sufficiently numerate to meet that expected standard. I think you'd probably agree, and I think I'm chatting to Neil about this. Like, I'd say like that mathematics, that expected standard mathematics, if it's secure, it's kind of good in life mathematics. That's going to set you up pretty well to make some decent decisions in your life. You know enough about percentages, you know enough about basic, arithmetic, and you've got a good enough understanding of other sort of concepts to probably go through life and pick the right mortgage and be able to perform arithmetic within a role. There isn't sort of branching into algorithms. So for most roles, that's really important mathematics. And I don't think you'd probably need much more than that if you'd secured it, to be honest. But we're as a country, 25% of children aren't passing. And our job, and this is why probably I'm quite passionate about this, like, above all of the things, is to close. And then maybe people will argue it's nonsense, you can't do it. And it might well be right. I'm going to say it's not nonsense. Is to close the gap, right? Is to give those children who possibly got a lesser chance for other reasons to be not disadvantaged. But it's generally that 25% of children that we're not helping, and really in mathematics teaching, I think really within reason, in any class in most areas in the country, it doesn't take a lot of good maths teachers to get 60% of them across the line. And I think maths teachers should really the focus should be about the 25%. They're the kids that you're trying to make a difference to. That is the point in education, isn't it? Like to level the playing field as best as we can. And so that your focus should only be on the 25%, really. Really, the average mathematics teacher will get 60% of children there. Some pretty good maths teacher will get 75% of children there. But that's not changing the status quo. That's maintaining the status quo. And I'd argue that 25% of children leaving is embarrassing and shameful. And it's that 25% of children who the children were meant to be helping. These are the guys we're meant to be supporting. And the guys we're meant to make a difference to. We're letting them leave without the numeracy required to do basic clerical jobs and above. And I'd say actually the sort of maths you can do at the end of primary, if you do it well, it was actually quite good for most jobs. You wouldn't need much more in most professions. And I sort of read around this, and I've read quite a lot about sort of the impact of numeracy. I'm probably off kind of spiel, but like the impact of a lack of numeracy is quite significant on people in later life. And a lack of numeracy counts for, the percentage probably changed, but let's go with probably the fact it's reasonably true, like a difference in sort of like in financial quality of life of about 25% as well. And the impact on girls is far higher than boys. Last time I read it, I think it's in Does Numeracy Matter Still? A lack of basic numeracy had a greater impact than a lack of basic literacy. You need a system that supports the 25%, so they're not the 25%. You can't have a system that satisfies making an expected standard and taking 75% of children across the line that probably would have made it with some really average maths teaching and aren't disadvantaged in the first place. Our job is to make it a reasonably even playing field, isn't it? That's what I'd argue. I'm not saying anyone needs to go into any particular profession. I don't care what people do. Like that's fine. But at least let them have the same choices as everybody else. And I think, it's not enough to say, our school hits the national standard for maths. That's 75% or whatever it is, 78%. That says that 22% of children can't make it. That's not right. That's just not right. And I'd argue this system stops that happening and allows you to focus on the children who need you to make the biggest difference for them, maybe. But for whatever reason, not a lack of love at home or anything like that, just for whatever reason, just don't maybe have the advantages that others may have, and so the system itself is really straightforward. Like, so when I got to Hailsham and we started to look at the maths provision, which was, the children were being beneath 75%, to be fair, I proposed like maybe making something else, maybe working differently on it. I proposed that could we come up with a way of offering children extra time every single day, and I argued that if we did that, we'd close the gaps and stop them forming. Now, I'm not going to say for a second this will solve for every child. There are some children that have specific difficulties in mathematics, or their SEND sort of diagnosis just impacts maths to a degree where this won't be enough. Okay, we don't get 100% of children passing, but that's a separate matter. At no point in all of this am I saying this will attend to that. But what I'm going to argue is that for 90% of children, this will be enough. And so what we looked at was, we said, okay, so that means we need to find more time. So if you can make maths lessons longer, we can just make maths lessons generally longer so that everybody has more time, but that will take away from somewhere else. Okay. And I remember we were looking at phonics as well. So everything I'm saying about maths is true of phonics. Then there's children that don't need that extra time. My feeling is any one lesson is usually at best 5 or 6 that need a bit of extra time. So we said, okay, well what could we, is that a necessary sacrifice? Like, okay, that would work, but we're trading off maybe over a day. If we added 20 minutes to math, 20 minutes to phonics, we're trading off 40 minutes, which is probably a lesson, or a large part of a lesson. We're probably trading off a subject every day. Is that a deal worth making? Well, how else can we do this? And we said, okay, well, where could we make sacrifices, and where would we be willing to make them? And do remember, like, the time in primary school is a finite number. Like, no one's extending the school day, and anything you do will have a cost. And what you're trying to do is minimize that cost and be satisfied that it's ethically the right thing to do. It's the best trade-off for what you're trying to achieve. Now, we believe that numeracy and literacy were important and essential for them beyond primary, and also for them engaging parts of the wider curriculum. So there was a belief that we did have to find this time. It's just a question of how we did it. And so we looked at the whole school timetable. Okay, and we said, okay, maybe we just need to redo the traditional timetable. So wherever that might be. And so we looked at it and said, okay, and when we do this, let's see if we can address some other issues in timetables. Well, typical timetable in my experience would be things like you'd have writing, then reading, then you'd have playtime, and then you'd have maths, and then you'd have lunchtime, you'd have a lesson, then you'd have assembly, and another lesson, or you might have assembly at the end of the day. And often you get lessons that are sitting together. That's always a weird one. You've got like one lesson goes into another lesson, without a sort of a physical break. And my experience with that was that when you have that in the timetable, no one ever sticks to it. Like it's never stuck to, because that science lesson went on a bit, but in the meantime, because RE was next, RE is now 20 minutes long instead of 40. And similarly, you get that in the morning. You get this overlap, this bleed between one lesson and another. Actually, what we did was sort of take that on board as well and go, can we just be, if we're trying to spend curriculum time with children, we're trying to give them and ensure that they get a wide and rich curriculum, that actually we ensure, we know that when we say to our subject leads, you have an hour a week for history, when you're designing that curriculum, we spend a lot of time, like everybody else, designing curriculums, that actually they get that hour a week. So we also thought about that as well. And so we moved to like a really discrete timetable. So I'm just going to sort of like frame this with the fact that we teach currently, and it's obviously changed since COVID because of where COVID is, we taught every subject every week. Okay. Apart from DT, which we teach because it works better in like a run in a block at the end of each term, because it's just better that way. We changed the school timetable. I'm just going to explain it to you because it's probably easier. And this is it. This is how it works. And it allows us to teach all the subjects discreetly for the time that's allotted to them, and do same-day intervention for both phonics and mathematics. So I'm going to explain this really slowly, and a diagram would really help here. So I'll do a presentation of this, so it'll probably be easy to understand. So our school day looks like this. Mathematics is first thing, and it's for 1 hour, and that's followed by assembly for 20 minutes, which is followed by reading for 40 minutes, which is followed by playtime, whatever it is, 15, 20 minutes, which is followed by writing for 1 hour. Okay, and reading would be phonics if it was Key Stage 1, and we'll include phonics Key Stage 2. Then it's lunch, which is 50 minutes, and then it's lesson A in the afternoon, which is 1 hour. Then it's daily mile. Then it's lesson 2 in the afternoon, which I think is 50 minutes. And then it's whole class reading, which is 15 minutes. That's our school day. So first of all, we've got there is discrete lessons. So every lesson is bordered so that its time is secured. You have an hour for maths, 40 minutes for reading, an hour for writing, an hour for lesson A, and 45 minutes or 50 minutes for lesson B. A lot. And between those things are other things. Okay, they're also part of your curriculum. So whole class reading is the end of the day. That's the teacher reading to the class every single day. That's as important to us as lesson A and lesson B. And those lesson A's and lesson B's are our foundation subjects. Okay, I'm not going to say which ones they are, but there's 10 of them there. So that's the timetable. That's the school day. So hour of maths, 20-minute assembly, 40 minutes of reading, playtime, hour of writing, lunchtime, hour of foundation A, daily mile for 20 minutes, I think it is, 45 minutes of foundation B, whole class reading. So first of all, we made the thing discrete. That's really helpful, right? So if you're a subject leader, it's really helpful to know that the time you've been allotted to your subject is actually the time that's being given to that subject. Because one of the and I'm sort of going off this, but I've got a lot of interest in a lot of other curriculum areas. And one of the things I've always known is the difference between like intended curriculum and the curriculum's being delivered in class. And often the problem with that is that subjects get lost, that no one's got control over the time being spent on them. Here's our massive progression map and curriculum for history, but actually in reality, the enacted curriculum looks really different because no one's controlled the time being spent on it. We've said it needs to be this big, but actually, either we're letting teachers timetable their own slots and so that it's getting different amounts of time, or it comes after PE. So it's variable whether it happens. So we were like really keen to discreetly sort of like pin this stuff down. So there's one advantage of doing this, right? Like you get to have discrete time on subjects, and then you can spend on them correctly. So if I know I've got, and we literally calculate the hours, if I know I've got, X weeks a year, 1 hour a week for history, then I know what my curriculum should look like. Equally, if I've got 50 minutes a week for 1 hour a year, I know that this curriculum is going to be, slightly smaller, isn't it? It's going to be slightly smaller than the other one. And so I can create an achievable curriculum there. What subjects you put in each slot, because some subjects get more time than others, is to do with what your school priorities are. So for our schools there, the slightly longer foundation subjects, and they're only slightly longer, but they are subjects that for our demographic we feel are really important. So that's RE, geography, history, PE and science. And the reason for that is to do with the demographic we're working with. However, art and DT and music and everything else is taught well every week. Like no one's not getting anything, but there's a little bit more time spent on those subjects. People can argue that's not the one, but that's the choices to make in school. So what you've got is this timetable, which is now discrete. Okay, with nice set amounts of time. So everyone knows what's going on. Every subject leader knows what time they've got to spend and what they can expect from pupils over their time in school. And also you've got these discrete breaks. So you stop bleeding. You stop the bleeding between lessons. So you're controlling the time as well. You're not losing it. You're not saying we do this, then actually that's not what happens. And then what you've got within some of these breaks is an option to intervene. After mathematics is very deliberately assembly. And assembly is 20 minutes long. Should children need longer each day after mathematics to secure that step, they stay with the teacher. Those that don't go to assembly. If there are children with phonics that need that extra bit of time each day to secure that piece of code, they spend that 20 minutes with the teacher and the rest do the daily mile. Now, the first thing you say is that's costing them. They're not going to assembly. They're not going to daily mile. So here's one thing. If they go once, they very rarely miss anything else. So a child that comes to 20 minutes and misses one assembly is highly unlikely to need to come the next day. And I'm not saying this model for 1 second doesn't come at a cost, but I am going to argue this is the minimum you'll spend to secure genuine understanding of mathematics and secure a genuine ability to read. So that's how the model works. So you do mathematics, and we'll talk about how you make sure children are in this group and what you do about it in a second. And really the intervention is not the point. In a nutshell, that's simply mechanically what's going on. And to utilize that intervention time well, then we need to know what the misconceptions are and be able to spend that time wisely. But there's a lot more to this, but on a basic level, that's the timetable, that's the day, that's what happens. I do maths for an hour, and at the end of the hour, if I need 20 more minutes, which is like 33% more time, I'd argue, and I've found to be enough, then I'll get it every single day if I need it. And that means that my teacher can help me secure the thing I've not got. If it's a small step, that shouldn't be too difficult. This sits on the prerequisite of teaching things in small steps, like well. And I probably won't need to come tomorrow or again for weeks and weeks and weeks after, because I've dealt with the problem that I had. What I'm going to say very clearly now is that any child that comes to keep up intervention for more than 1 or 2 sessions in a row is identified, and that's not the intervention for them. And we do have more focused, more intense intervention for those children that need it, like children that join the school, and when it's not enough, that's not going to make a difference. But for 94% of children, this works.
I love the way you started with the discussion of the cost of time, explained the transaction, and then brought it right back. That was an expertly crafted sort of journey through what's necessary. How the light bulb just went and I was like, yes, that transaction is a much more cost-effective transaction than normally see.
I'm not saying this is like rocket science. I'm not really going to talk today about the quality of maths teaching particularly. I don't think that's the important thing here. I think it is important, but I think really like it's Do you accept that some children need more than time than others? Yes, you do, because you're spending it on them anyway. You're pulling, maybe you're not, but either you're satisfied that they're just going to leave failing, or you're going to put in a load of cramming interventions at the end of a phase. So you know that anyway. So just spend the time better, and you might, be more intelligent about how that time is spent. And what you'll find, you do spend less time. The bottom line is you spend less time. You take less time off them. You make less trade-offs. I've only got a sample of like 5 or 6 schools this one, 5 properly working, I'd say. We just introduced in a 6th school now of this working, but it is working comfortably in a number of primary schools. One condition is that it's not going to change the world overnight. Right? It's not going to, it's not going to change things. I think my feeling is it's taken 3 years for it to really like embed and become, for the first year or 2, there are some children that the gaps are still too big for, and that other interventions will be necessary. Good interventions will be necessary. I don't think you can't just do this and it will solve everything. So it's an odd one to get a school to invest time in and make the changes that are necessary to accomplish, really, because it's you're not going to do it, and at the end of the year, you got 94% and whatever else. It's like a 2-3 year process. Basically it's almost journey through a phase, isn't it? But by 3 years, any child in your traveling through mathematics in your school or phonics in your school, for 90% of children will not need you to make any dramatic intervention beyond this. And that's something I will say. So maybe in that sense, it's a lot harder to ask the school to consider this if they're doing okay as they are, or they're in really dire straits and they need to make a big difference soon. There are pressures from LEAs that require that, and I understand that, and I am definitely supported by a very brave and intelligent Academy Trust.
Is a mastery model of schooling possible at the primary phase, and how should schools approach implementing such a model?
I've sort of broadly talked about sort of the beats of the school day. I think, as mechanical as that is, it begins with a timetable that facilitates it working. You've got to create time. We talk about that sort of trade-off. I think, and then it's kind of really, but it won't work. That alone won't work without like specific like conditions for growth. Is like a nice terminology for it. It's a really nice. I don't know how Fletcher would word this. Somebody wrote something about the ground being sort of fertile enough to grow the plants. Do you know what I mean? Like if this is the thing you're trying to do, then the conditions for growth need to be correct to begin with. So I'd say there's a few things kind of need to be in place for this to even work, like to even consider this. Number one, and the most important is absolute backing from the senior leadership team, right? For a couple of reasons. The first one is that it's not going to produce results, as I've said, straight away. Okay, so you just got to believe in it. You've got to believe in the purpose of it. You've got to believe in the sort of the vision behind it. It's not to do what you want it to do for the whole school for a year or so, and that you're going to have to make some compromises in the short term and have to intervene in other ways. But also mainly because the SLT actually have to do the heavy lifting. Okay, so for this to work, let's talk about that math slot in particular, but it works during our math slot for children to be able to attend that and be in the classroom, their class teacher. That means the rest of the school, let's imagine a 2 form entry school, right? Whatever that is, 400 odd kids or 300 odd kids, have got to go somewhere else where the teachers aren't. So if you're gonna have every class teacher work, and it has to be the class teacher, we know this. You've got to put them with the most expert person. It's not going to work if you have it as well if you have them with a different adult. Then that means someone else can have to do the heavy lifting. So this requires them. So in our schools, this requires the SLT to run assemblies on their own. Okay, so that means 300 odd children in the hall and be able to manage that assembly without teachers being in the room. And we have a couple of TAs in our schools, not one for every class, and they'll help with the movement. And if you haven't got that, then you just get one of the teachers to move the children, then come back and do it. It's not complicated. They've got to commit to those assemblies every single day, and they've got to be willing to manage those almost single-handedly. So behind that then is another prerequisite, which is behaviour needs to be in place within the school. And that's another podcast altogether, and I'd love to come back to behaviour. It's another real passion of mine because it's such a prerequisite for learning anyway. But for this to work, then you've got to be able to transition a whole school to an assembly with minimal adults and back with minimal problems. This only works because behaviour is in place. Anyone visiting Hawks Farm or Burfield Academy or Phoenix Academy or White House Academy will see that this hinges upon having first secured behaviour through focusing on routines and culture and relationships with children. Okay. On top of that, and this isn't a prerequisite, so you talk about as I'll quote Petrificre too much, to be honest. I'm getting a bit tired of it, but like he talks about things being tight and loose. Like what do you need to be tight about and to be loose about? Well, for this to work, you have to have the, if you use assembly as a slot, then you've got to, you absolutely need to have just the leaders taking that assembly, and if possible, helping the transitions around school. So the other leaders committing to that. Also, it's useful to ensure that teachers also get a break from learning. So in our schools, they don't do playground duty, because in this assembly where they might normally diffuse and have a break between two lessons, they're not getting that. And so no one does playground duty in our schools. Okay, which leads on to because then after reading, they've got some time to refocus. You can't just be making them teach all day without break. So that's one sort of prerequisite, like a full SLT backing, because they're going to do the heavy lifting. And so that means I'm running assemblies, supporting those transitions, and in our schools, running the playtimes as well. That's a big commitment from that senior leadership team. And you're only going to get that if you believe this is going to work and it's valuable. There's no point doing it otherwise. There isn't like, talk about being tight loose. It doesn't work if you don't do that. It just doesn't work. So you need behaviour in place. You need absolute commitment from SLT, and because they're going to heavy lift this. Then sort of thirdly, you've got to make sure the teachers are confident enough and capable enough to deliver these interventions well. So you need to remove all the chaff from the day. You need to let them spend their time thinking about mathematics and planning mathematics and considering what misconceptions are coming and having ownership of the maths in front of them. Now, this isn't this, you can use a scheme of work fine by me, but we don't use a scheme of work, not prescriptive scheme of work. And we have no after school clubs. Right? Another thing we don't have. We have after school clubs. The staff don't run them. It's optional. They can if they want to, but generally don't, because it's about giving them time to think and prepare, and to make sure the questions they ask, the examples they give, tease out the misconceptions so that they can address them. There's no point like teaching a lesson that doesn't tease out the misconception, so you don't know if children have got misconception yet. So make sure the lessons are real planned. And for that to happen, then I suppose, and this is, you need to have a really good CPD professional development offer for your teachers. Okay, so it's all right giving them all this time, but how are you going to sort of help them improve? I think it's probably the most revolutionary thing STEP at least do, and for me, is that we don't have one CPD session every week. So we don't have the usual sort of like behemoth hour, 20 minutes on a Tuesday, which is painful to be in sometimes after a long day, like hard work. It also robs you of the rest of your day to do any thinking. So really, you're not going to do anything about anything the next day if you're sat in a meeting for an hour 20 to talk about safeguarding or whatever else, a valuable thing, but for a long time. So instead, we have 2 35 minutes a week, and never more than that. And so on a Tuesday and Thursday, we have 2 short CPD sessions. So you finish teaching, whatever time it is, and at 3:45, we have short CPD sessions. Okay, so automatically, we've now got double the amount of CPD sessions. You could argue, well, it's no different because you spend the time differently. I'd say it is different because that's wasteful. And what it allows us to be is responsive to our teachers. If your data is telling you that teachers need more support with, I don't know, supporting like teaching fractions, then you can immediately respond to that. So of a term, if you think about, you've got in a short term, you've got 6, normally you'd have 6 CPD sessions, and in many schools they're booked out way in advance, the whole year's planned out. Well, 6 of ours will be, the other 6 won't be, and they're used responsively to what we see in the classroom to give support where we need it, and then be responsive to the whole cohort, to all of the schools, or they may be used to allow people time to engage in their own CPD. And I don't want to sell complete maths here. I'm really trying to avoid being, but yeah, I think one of the best things about complete maths maybe is kind of is a what's it called, teacher CPD college, Netflix for maths basically. That we can provide that time for people to engage in a video about something they need to engage in. That's about trusting your teachers, isn't it? Really, it's about trusting your teachers, but it's about also having this really responsive PD, sort of, which has its kind of like main goals. So you can still follow the sort of like the school academy and school improvement plan and push through the things you want to push through, but also have space to be responsive to the classrooms and support where you need to, either as a group or in small groups, or letting people individually sort of like improve their own craft, I suppose. And I strongly argue this is the best model for doing FD, because I thought initially, well, it's the same time, you get no more accomplished. Absolutely nonsense. You get way more accomplished. It also allows you, it allows you to break things down smaller. And what you often find is when you've got 6 sessions a term, and one of them has to be this and one has to be that, like, you go, I'm going to do one on fractions. You do an hour 20. You must have done this, and you've done the whole of fractions in an hour 20. Like, and only a little bit of that's gone in. We know about good professional development, it has to be ongoing and persistent, and so on and so forth. And this allows much more for that, much more flexibility in the schedule to do that. So it might be you over a term, you look at mathematics and you speak to teachers about it. Like, what do you want to help with? Should always do that. Don't think it's just about learning walks. Yes, it's good to walk the schools, talk to the kids, talk to the teachers, and have a look around. And from that, it might be really clear that people need some support with checking for understanding, right, in mathematics. And so then you may use that to plan an 8-session program on techniques. And you've got the room in your CPD schedule to do that, because you've got this room, you've got this elasticity, this room to move, because you've got double the amount of sessions. You don't need an hour course for everything. Like, less time's almost better in my view. You can be more particular about things. And then finally, I suppose you just need to have the right culture in the classroom, don't you? So you've got the leadership fully supporting the mechanism working, the school working hard to make sure behaviour lets it work, the teachers able to improve their practice so that they can use the time as well as possible, and finally you need the children to be willing to say, I've got it wrong. You've got to absolutely, like, create that culture where it's okay to be wrong and to know that you'll be helped, like in a lesson. I think most people kind of know that, but mathematics is really binary, isn't it? Like, you're right, you're wrong, and actually, like, and that's why people love it, I think, because it's that immediate success, like ping, 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 like all those hits, like yeah. But equally, like, it can also, because it's quite fragile, sort of like, self-efficacy, then also you can feel quite bad if you don't think there's a way out of it. And I think, you've got to really create that culture in the classroom where errors are celebrated, and we engage with errors, and we deliberately set lessons up to bring out errors, and that's not something to be sort of shamed about. Going to a keep-up session is a positive thing. Like, kids don't mind that. They feel like I'm there to be helped. I think so. They're no small things I've talked about. They're probably, I've talked about some quite significant things there in the need to be in place for this model to work. And probably could do a podcast on all of them, to be honest. Like, I think you should, I think it'd be really interesting to speak to Petra about motivation if you get a chance, because I think it's a fascinating area of, like, about behavioural science, I guess, that we probably need to know more about. And he does a really good job of taking you quite a few steps on that journey. Definitely enlightened me around it, to be honest. But it doesn't mean you have to wait for them all to be there to get it working. Like, you can work things alongside it. So I kind of say there's the preconditions for growth, for it to work. It's then about, like, okay, so if you've got this time in a lesson, at the end of a lesson, how do you make sure you use it well? First of all, you've got to make sure that, like, the steps in learning are correct and sequenced well. So you use a good schema work for that if you don't, but also spend time working with teachers on sequencing mathematics. I'm not saying every step takes a lesson, but you just get the steps, like maybe 15 steps over 8 lessons, doesn't really matter, just understand the steps. And then what you've got to be able to do is to know who needs help when. So if we look at a basic maths lesson, if I do something, we do a load together, and then when I'm happy, you do some on your own. And then if we're happy with that, we can go a bit deeper with that same step. If we take that as being like the basic model, then it's just about, okay, how do I know who knows what at any point in the lesson? And this is where, like, it gets to be quite forensic. Like, we've got some really forensic assessment points, because all this makes no difference if you're sitting with a load of kids and you're at that point you're trying to unpick the problem. Like, you want to know the problem as soon as you know the problem. We've got the balance. We work really hard to get the balance of the I, we, you correct. So in my experience, when this kind of goes wrong in maths teaching, is that everyone overlooks the we aspect of it. The ratios all out of sync. It's like, 3, 1, 2. Like, lots of I, very little bit of we, if you even bother, and some time practicing. So first of all, get the sequence right. So the instruction, and make sure you cover a number of examples and lots of variation, should maybe be 5-10 minutes. If you're 5 minutes, right? If your thing's correct. The we section should be significant. we should be running through a variety of models, beginning with children working in pairs and moving towards them working independently in the we section. Okay, and we're looking at like 15, 20 minutes here, give or take. Like, spend time like just going through lots and lots and lots of examples. So you're starting to, and that's about considering your examples in the first place. And I think mathematics is all about examples. And then the U section is also quite long. Like, you need to give them enough time to practice, but not too much time. So if I was going to talk about ratios, instead of being like 3, 1, 1, I'd argue it should be like 1, 3, 2 or something. If you're thinking about how that model should work. Let's imagine I've modeled something really well. I've modeled how to, I don't know, measure an angle on the clockwise outside, scale. It's quite complicated. I've taken 5 minutes doing that. I'm then going to do some with the children. Okay, to begin with, I want them to be working in pairs, collaboratively. There's huge amounts of evidence around the impact of collaborative learning and peer-to-peer support. So at the beginning of that, they're going to work through some really well-chosen examples, a lot of them, not two, a lot of examples. And that really drives me mad. One example, and then you often move on to independent. And they do the independent work. It looks nothing like the example I've just done. Like the thing you teach should look like the thing they're going to do together, and it should look like the thing they're doing around. So lots of examples, maybe like 10 examples, right? With some variation in there to make sure, it's challenging them. And at that point, we have like think, pair, share. Okay, now this is proper think, pair, share, where the teacher actually moves around the classroom. So think, pair, share is only useful if you listen to children talking. The point of assessment is to check all the kids all the time, right? Like, there are no proxies in math lessons. Like, you need to know what every kid's thinking, really. So I've modelled how to do this on my visualizer. I spent a long time modelling it. The children have listened. At the start of that, they've repeated it back to me. At the start of the we section would be the end of my section. And now I'm going to see how they go with it. To begin with, they're going to be doing proper think, pair, share, where one does it and then explains to the other one what they've done. Okay, and at that point, as a teacher, I move around the room and I listen to what they're doing. I don't engage, I just listen to their conversations and I watch what they're doing. And I don't have a random route around the classroom, I have a set route around the classroom. So I see every single child. And I might not get to ask every child in the first sweep, but I'll put another example up, I'll walk again. I'll be listening to what they're doing. So and I'm giving them time to think, and then they're gonna have a go and explain to their partner and explain back. So important, this aspect, like massively overlooked. And I'm not going to intervene. I'm not going to stand at the front of the classroom. What's the point in that? And then asking for 3 kids to explain it. Like, there is some value in that, but all I ever know is what 3 kids think. If I actually walk around and listen, I can harvest huge amounts of data and really early on start adapting my examples on the board and picking out those misconceptions, having children address them for each other. So that's the first stage of the we section. Think, pair, share. It's so powerful if you actually listen to children. It's beyond useless if you stand at the front. And after a long time in my career, it was me standing at the front going, right, think, pair, share, talk to me, and invariably give them no thinking time either, like no wait time, just crack on. Give them proper wait time, let them have a go at it. At the paired point, walk, listen to every child, and over a number of examples, you'll be able to listen to every child and start to adapt your teaching accordingly. And you'll start to see success. And then you go, okay, so all right, so now I need to move them to work independently in the we section. So I do one, you do one. So at this point, what I probably didn't make it clear, like, we'll be using like problem pairs on the board. So I'll do one, and then we'll go through one on the other side. So I don't know what problem pairs are. Like, here's a whiteboard, there's a line down the middle. Here's my example, my worked example here, and here's their version. That they're going to have a go on next to it, and then we'll work it through together. So you do some independent ones now. And so now I do the same amount probably of independent examples. So like, okay, you have done your whiteboards now. And then we're going to do sort of like, then it's going to be about like show me boards, like whiteboards up. And top tip, which I sort of think I've shared everybody now, is like, at this point, you want to see every single child. So it's no good to go like, show me whiteboards, and they all come up in long wave and they'll put them down, you don't really read them. Like, get them to come up at a row, like, okay, give them appropriate time to answer it. So think about how long what the wait time should be. The wait time for questions depends on the question. Like, how long you need to think about 3 times 5 is different to how long you need to think about 7 cubed. So there's no point having like a default wait time. Like, give appropriate wait time. Don't ask them too early to put their boards up, like, and then the boards come up, but get them to come up in rows or pods or however you do it. Like, so back row up, read those, down, middle row up, read those, down, front row up. It's like forensic. Okay, so there's a common misconception. Let's do another example. Let me work it through for you. Let me explain that to you again, or maybe one of the children will model it. Repeat, 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 repeat. Okay, until those boards are starting to show you 80% success and more. Generally, they will. Like if you teach something small enough, you'll easily get that. If you're teaching it well enough and you spend enough time in the read section, you'll get that. At that point, when you start to see success for most of the classroom, you're going to move most of those kids to independent work. Okay, so we're looking at minimum 80%. If it's less than 80%, you need to reteach it. You need to recycle the whole lesson. You might, and be willing to do that. Be willing to rejig the lesson. If you've got 60% of getting it, you need to go back to the I stage. But otherwise, let's say now, okay, we're getting most children successful. They've worked really well in pairs. They're working really well independently. Now I need to move into some practice, and we might be like 30 minutes into lesson now. So there's some substantial amount of practice now of questions similar to those I've done, not different. So that's be bonkers, wouldn't it? Like, and at that point, you're going to start working with the children that are struggling. Okay, you're going to intervene now. So when we talk about that extra time is not the only time they're getting. They're getting a teacher immediately. Okay, bring them to the front. You start to work through some examples with them, and you've already got a sense of misconception. Start to unpick it. You might find that you've solved one of those in the first 5 minutes. Off they go back to independent work, and we'll check on them in a second. We're not waiting to the end of the lesson for this. It's not like we are intervening earlier, but that extra minutes means that probably you'll get everybody there in the end. So I've got 4 kids that I've got struggling a little bit. I've teased out the misconception because my examples were likely to unpick that one. And I'm going to bring them to the front and start working with them while the rest crack on. Okay, I'm going to work with them for 5-10 minutes while the rest are cracking on. And what I'm going to do now is, okay, right, you're looking all like this. Here's a few examples. Have a go at those. I'm going to go and check on the rest of the class. And it's the same as like Think Best Share. You follow the route around the class, right? And this is the Lemov thing. It's called error tracking. It's a game changer for marking, right? So here's my route around the classroom. I go like row A, row B, row C. On their task sheet or book, well, I'd say sheets is quite useful. Make it really clear where they put their answer, because we're going to mark them really quickly now. So having like random places for answers makes your job really difficult. So have a box to put the answer, make it really clear what the answer is. And then you have a copy of the sheet with the answers on it, because that's a really clever thing to do. So you're not having to work out on the way around. This doesn't work for things like roll 3 dice and make an addition calculation, which is why I don't really like them, because you don't really know what you're asking kids to do. So I'm much happier with you being in charge of the examples they're doing. So here's my sheet, there's their sheet. I'm going to walk on the classroom, I'm going to mark. And I'm not going to stop. Traditionally, what we do is we mark, well done, 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 well done. Oh, I'm stuck. And you stop and talk to someone. And then the lesson runs away with you and you never get around the rest of the class. And we don't do that. It's really hard not to do that to begin with, but we just mark everyone. And what we do on our sheet, we tick, 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 dot, whatever it might be, and anytime there's a misconception, we just tally it and make some notes. So what you're doing is creating a little bar graph on your task sheet of where the problems are. And then when you finish your loop, you might have to do 2 to do it. It takes about 3 minutes, time this, to mark a whole class. You then go to the board and reteach if there's a common misconception. And you loop the process. And you may just then give them a set of questions around that, independent questions around that. And the children know that. So to begin with, they're like, oh, well, you stay and help me. But they very quickly realize that you are going to help them. You're just going to see everybody first. I think this is like a game changer. Like in everyone's marked, everyone's seen it, everyone's misconceptions are addressed. I think, for a long time, most of my career, I'd start marking and get stuck with a kid, right? Okay. Number one, most of the kids doing this shouldn't be getting stuck because they've got to this point where you think they can work independently. But even if they do, because something slipped, like we're going to deal with it as a whole class back at the front, because it's going to benefit them. It's going to benefit the kids you're already working with, because they're probably going to have that misconception as well. And it means you're totally in control of who knows what all the time. And that's what you need to be. And then we finish this area tracking and we deal with any small misconceptions. We might run that process again. We might have to like loop with a particular misconception, model it, do some together again, and then send them and be willing to write some questions yourself until everyone's kind of successful. In the meantime, I'll go back to working in my small group. I might now be able to set them up an independent task. I might give them some more input. If there's a lot of success in the classroom, we'll take them deeper. We'll then go to the next, we'll extend their understanding. I won't go into depth in this session if that's okay, because that's another thing I've talked a long time about, is how you create depth in the math lesson. We've made some real changes to that and how we do it, and I'm really into like method selection tasks and interleaving as being the most potent thing you can do for another day. I think that one. But let's imagine, so now I'm in a classroom where I kind of know what everyone knows all the time, you know, and as best I can, I'm keeping everybody kind of in the right place. You will naturally take children deeper, they will succeed and they will go deeper, and the rest of us now do that, and we would teach that depth. And at the end of the lesson, we will use some like a hinge point question. So what often happens is you take children deeper is they stop feeling success because it gets harder, doesn't it? Right. And you can forget who knows what, like at the end of the lesson, right? Well, at the end of the lesson, we'll have like an MCQ, couple of hinge point questions, you know, so a multiple choice question based on the new learning, not the deep stuff, not the stuff that's gone deeper, just the thing you taught them that they really have to secure today to understand tomorrow in the best possible way. The wrong answers are the misconceptions, and you get the children to do those, and that's really powerful at the end of the lesson, and it's like an exit ticket, isn't it? So that reminds them that they could do it, because a lot of children can lose a little bit of faith as they're getting really deep and it's getting difficult. It reminds that they were successful. It also reminds you, it also tells you that some of these children have actually forgotten the thing I taught. Okay, so at the end of the lesson now, I now know where everybody is. I now know who should join the intervention. I know what the misconceptions are. Many of these children I've worked with already, so I've got a real understanding. But even for those that have just sort of like, you know, forgotten as the lessons progressed, I also know that they do need some more time just to feel success with that again. So now I know that these 5 children need to stay for intervention. So I have some more time. I know what their issues are. I know, and I may well be working on it. I know where to go next with them. So when I have this 20 minutes, I'm using it well. Yeah, I'm not assuming. It's a really weird one where you assume that everybody was successful in the initial task in mathematics. That as it gets deeper, they kind of remember the thing they've got successful at, and sometimes they don't. It kind of falls apart because they start focusing on deeper tasks, more sophisticated tasks. So actually, I'd like to pick up some of those kids that kind of like slipped a little bit, and then. But generally, what we find happens is like 85–90% children, 95% children are successful in the exit ticket, and our suite of data taken from like Think, Play, Share and from whiteboards and from error tracking supports like that. And we only need 1 or 2 children to spend the extra 20 minutes with. Often some of those children that found it difficult earlier, or been working with. Quite often, more often than not, nobody goes to say, there's no need for anyone to do same day keep up, because the whole system works so well that often like they're all right. You know, it's only on the trickiest steps in a sequence that you get a few. You get really high success rates because you're unpicking. And when it's you know, like if you're treating measuring angles, right? It's all the tricky step is when you use the inside scale, isn't it? Right, and it's going anti-clockwise. You need anti-clockwise angles, right? And so you might get 100% success day 1, day 2, and on that one you get some, predictable challenges because people are used to reading left to right and not right to left. And then you sit in attention, you know what you're doing. At 20 minutes, and you're going to practice with them. You know, you're going to practice. But it won't be the first time you've spoken to them. Like, you know, you for many of these, you've been working with them for 20 minutes anyway. Weirdly, it's not actually that busy. Same day intervention most days. In fact, many days it's not. And what we said to teachers is, and one thing we did before was like, if nobody came to it, nobody came to it. But what we kind of felt was, over time, we've decided that actually we should use that time. And so for those children that are secure, but we could take them deeper, we do that now. So we do pick a few children to work a bit deeper on, or to use that time to maybe address some fluency sort of like gaps, or provide some fluency practice. And that's it. And then there's an intervention. And then at the end of the intervention, we always we didn't used to do before, but now we make a little note they've been in it. Over time, as a teacher, if the child's pinging into that group too often, then a different intervention is required. Like if they're in, and you can lose track of that. I didn't talk about very quickly. When we were marking error tracking, we had 3 symbols we marked with. And I think this is something we've changed. So traditionally, you'd have like whatever you'd have success and a lack of success when you use symbols. So we've kind of moved away from that. So we've got like tick, you got it right. Like dot, you've made a mistake. Like you can self-correct this. That's and I think it's the dash we use, which is I'm going to reteach this, because I think 3 symbols is more useful. Like, or else you've got kids spending time on something they can't actually correct because it's like a fundamental misconception. So one thing we do with error tracking is like, if we're going to ask them to respond to our marking, if we bomb round, we only want them to respond to stuff we think they can respond to, and don't want them to waste time and feel bad trying to do something they just don't understand. Yeah, so we make it really clear now what we think is a mistake, a slippage in their number facts, or like just not repeat a mistake, you can probably correct that. We might not talk to them. Might go like, look at that number there, look at that. And but we have a symbol that says, okay, I'm going to reteach this. That giving them that reassurance that I know you didn't get this. I'll be at the board in 5 minutes. I'm going to unpick it for you. So we've got really forensic levels of. It's a bit anal, but I think it's necessary if you're going to take this time with children. Like, you need it to be well spent time, and so we have like pretty forensic levels of assessment, useful assessment for our lesson, but it really empowers the teachers and the children, in understanding who knows what at whatever points and how you can help. And the same day intervention time isn't the place we rely on to catch those children up. We're doing work throughout the lesson, but it is a bit of space to keep working with them if they need it. And also, just really interestingly, we found it like to secure those kids that kind of it slipped from, who've been really successful, we kind of forgot how to do it for some reason. Something that happens, doesn't it? Like, you get into something complex and you kind of forget how to do the original thing because you're so overloaded by this sophisticated problem. So that's kind of like a talk through like how it works, I guess. It's probably quite a long talk through how it works. And I'm going to hopefully do some presentation on this. I promised Mark McCaw I'd do one, but we've got lots of people to visit the school, so I'll definitely do one for them. And I'll use some diagrams to be quite useful, but because I'm talking around pictures here. But that's kind of the process, like really key, really important, really well done assessment points based on really well designed questions, based on lots of variation in the examples, and based on not using anybody as a proxy, like knowing what they all know all the time, and that way you use that time really well, and that way we very rarely get children behind. And so that's kind of it. Does that make sense?
You used the word forensic, and that's absolutely the word I was going to use. And everything you've described in this chat has been, it shows how forensic and how deeply you've thought about how all the pieces come together. So I reckon people need to, particularly that last section, sit with a note pen and piece of paper and make notes about what those pieces are and how you guys have melded them into this really effective system. I think my next question then would be, well, what are the key markers that let us know that a mastery model of schooling is working well?
I suppose you can talk about data, but data is probably really a key marker for any school, wouldn't it? So like, I don't know what you call data, but if we talk about sort of quantitative data, I guess, then at intervention level, what you'll see over time is less children come to intervention. You're preventing the snowballs forming. So actually what you'll see is when you first introduce this, children coming more regularly to intervention, but over time, you'll see a quite significant drop in how often children need the extra time. So that's been a really interesting mark for us, like something that, we found we were spending lots of time with with children every day. Now there's lots of days when there's no one needs to come, and that's a really pleasing thing. Like, that's a really pleasing thing. So I'd say that's a key sort of trend you'll see happening. You'll see children, initially lots of children coming, and over time far less children coming, far less regularly, far less often. I would say what you'll see is more parity in your end of year, like summative assessments or your end of term assessments. So what you'll start to see is that it evens out across the school, and it's at quite a high level. So to begin with, it doesn't look like that, but over time, it's not 90% in year 6 and 70 in year 5, and 70 in year 4 and 72 in year 3. It's 90% in every year group. That's the big marker, isn't it? Like, that's mastery, isn't it? Like, that's what you're trying to achieve, because they're staying together, which means then pretty much all being successful at maths every year. And I think that's the big, and we saw that happen to our data in our schools. In the Hawks Farm was the first one we introduced this to, and everyone else has kind of staggered a year later. But that's what started to happen. So you've got complete parity in the data across year groups, and really positive sort of parity. Really, you'll see it in the children. So when we look at data, when we look at things, then we do 3 things. I suppose 4 things really. We look at lessons, we look at the data, we talk to children, we talk to teachers. And what you'll see is the teachers actually teaching the children enjoying mathematics and being competent in mathematics, that the mathematics is something that they enjoy and look forward to. And I'd say that actually it's the same for teachers. It very quickly becomes a really positive subject in your school, and one in which all children believe they can do it. And not falsely, not like it's like I believe in doing it, really I'm not going to help them, but you'll see a change in attitudes. And I think when Mark visited, like what was it last term, that's I think what struck him most. It's just like the kids' positivity towards mathematics, like universally. Another thing you'll notice, and one of the things that comes out is your where you do have to intervene at a more intense level, okay, where children are enjoying the school or for whatever reason they've got other difficulties, you're doing it with the right children. And you're spending your money and your time better. So I would say before, there were lots of children receiving quite significant intervention around mathematics that really wouldn't have required it if there's a better model in the first place. And one thing you'll find is that there will still be children that need a different intervention. We use a connecting maths concept, which is kind of the Engelman stuff, like really amazing direct instruction, interleaved sequence. That's an amazing program, very expensive, but a really amazing program. We use that with those children that need, further support. And it's quite expensive, I suppose, and expensive for them and their time, expensive for us because it's money that you spend. But you're spending it well, like you spend it on the kids that need it, like as opposed to having, and you're getting smaller groups, aren't you? So like because there's less kids, like everyone's worrying about, then you can spend more time on fewer children. So actually, weirdly, like it allows you to do a better job of intervening at a more intense level because you're just intervening with the right kids, basically. So they're interesting things that we've noticed. So there's things we've noticed. I don't know if it's. I'm sure there are other markers. Like so, I'd say like an evening out of the sort of like attainment and actually at a high level. It allows you to deliver better, more appropriate intervention to those that really do need it, that have like some difficulties, and an overall kind of like cultural shift around learning, maybe in general, a belief around the subject. And I think that's easily overlooked data, isn't it? We tend to think in SLTs mainly about data, I think summative stuff. But for me, like the thing is really, what do kids think about maths? That's kind of thing, isn't it? What do they think about reading? Like, what do they think about themselves as mathematicians? What do they think about themselves as readers? One thing we haven't talked about today, and I really would like to talk about this in the future, if there's an opportunity, just like depth in mathematics. I know you talked about it before, but like, and problem solving in particular, I'm a bit fascinated by problem solving. One thing we don't do is like we don't hierarchically deliver fluency reasoning problem solving anyway. So what we've got is a lot more children engaging in the sort of more the beautiful part of mathematics, which is problem solving. That's kind of the end goal, isn't it? Like all the other stuff is to do the problem solving, and you get children that are really good at that and have time to do that sort of stuff. You have time, we have time in our curriculum. It's not worrying all the time. To now we're just starting to look at the teaching of non-routine problem solving. For another day, that one, but for non-routine problem solving, and is a problem with kind of mastery in the sort of term of like, there can be a problem is that it can disguise poor maths teaching. It's that they need another day, they need another day, like that. It can often be because it's just not been, just not very good maths teaching. Like, there is a curriculum to get through. So I think you just have to be, also be aware that this doesn't mean that you can spend 3 days on everything. You still have to have a high standard of like maths planning, and you still need to have the best chance of being successful every time you teach it. This shouldn't, create a culture whereby we can say, well, the whole class needs a day on this, whole class needs a day on this, whole class needs a day on this, which is actually in fact disguising a poorly prepared maths sequence. You've got to. There's a danger that can happen. You know what I mean? That basically you'll just spend that time on not very well prepared maths. Like kids do need an extra day if you didn't teach it very well, you didn't think it through. Of course they do. Like there's still an expectation teachers teach good maths, and we try and support them. We work really hard to support them in doing that. Another marker then would be like we've got almost zero staff turnover across 5 schools. Like there's almost I think it's almost none in 5 years. Like so, happy staff, always good. That's a real bonus. Happy staff who get to spend their time thinking about subjects and getting better. Like, that's good. I think that's an interesting sort of marker of this. They don't walk around that sort of like it's really hard, isn't it, when you're in like key stage 2 and you're in year 5 and you've got a child working at year 1. That's really, really, every day that's really, really upsetting. If that child's been left to sort of like drift away, because you don't really know what you're doing with them, and you can't teach them their own lesson. There's less of that, so there's less of that sort of like constant guilt of not helping the way you are. You feel like, as a teacher, do you know what you feel like? You feel like you're doing your job. Okay, I'm helping people when they need the help, and it's making a difference. I think there's just, I think there's probably a bigger story here about how it helps teachers feel about their profession, and there's something powerful, isn't there, about your leaders saying to you, I'm going to give you as much time as possible to teach children in the best way you can, because that's why I think it's important, because that's the thing that's going to make the biggest difference. And I think there's a sort of wider sort of meta sort of story there about how it changes the culture in schools, so it moves away from being interventions are something we do, in schools when we need to, and towards like, this is what we do, this is what we're about. And I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, I really like the term model of schooling, because that's exactly what it is. It is a whole scale approach that you've sort of demonstrated can have massive impact, both in this interview and just through your work over the last number of years. What came across really strongly was the idea that high success rate in summative assessments are the byproduct of a really high quality maths lesson or maths education, as opposed to the focus of. And that comes across really, 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 really well. You've given me a list of maybe 6, 7 podcasts that we're going to record in the future, and I've got plans for 20 years of TDAPE, so there will be plenty of time in the future.
If you want to do, I'd like to talk about method selection. I'd like to talk about routine, non-routine problem solving. They're the things that really fascinate me at the moment. And obviously early maths, we haven't talked about. One thing I'm just going to say lastly is, behind all this is an understanding of where you put staff, right? So if you want, let's think about early years. I'm unbelievably passionate about early years. And one thing I'll say is, like, there's some really weird sort of like parity booking with staffing in schools, and that we go, everybody gets a TA, everybody gets, like, front load the staff where it matters. Where's that same day intervention going to happen most regularly? It's going to happen in early years in year 1. So another thing we've thought about really hard is like how our staffing's loaded in the school. So where we can get more bodies in the classroom having more conversations, then we push that towards our early years and to year 1, where that's, I know it's just probably a conversation at the time, but I just think, like, I will say with all of this is a work in progress, right? It's been going on for like 3-4 years, and it didn't start with this model. Like, we've got really, really, like, the forensic sort of assessment is something we work really hard on doing. I think the overall model now is where it is, and it works really, really well. What we start to now unpick is kind of like depth. We'll probably think we pretty worked on that quite a lot, but now what I'm really concerned with, because we decided this is something is like our children's access to problem solving. So that's kind of our current conversations in the schools, and we don't think this is like, like, this is how we got it right, everybody else got it wrong. I don't think that at all. I just think this model works really well for quite children, different demographics in quite different primaries at different sizes, and it does the right thing by children. But I'm not saying that schools don't do something different that works just as well. I'm not saying that's the case. I'm sure there's people with better ideas than this, like lots of people with better ideas than this. This is, I just know, and it's not my idea. I just need to name lots of people it, because there are lots of people who are part of this. So obviously I've been quite a big part of this, but also Sam Thomas, who is, I think, at Mr. T or something on Twitter for those that matter. Sarah Cochran, Jeremy Meek, who's the executive head teacher across the 4 schools. He's the guy that backed this. Amazing leader. And then all the heads have got D Hughes, who's an EUFS kind of expert as well, head of sort of lead for us, the whole trust, to make, who's got it working in early years, to make sure the early years is doing its job, and then we've got sort of Lee Drinkwater and Danny King, and lots of people involved. But it's not just me, and Tom Gary, like, and the guys I work with, like Tom and I talk maths, and going to be like that, yourself and Chris Such and Neil and Shannon and so on and so forth. It's lots of conversations that have got us to where we are, and people saying things to me that have made me go away and think. And then there's the schools themselves supporting it happening and being brave enough. And what I think I'll probably finish by saying, we've been through quite a few Ofsteds, right? Like either side of the framework change, and this has been met universally with like really positive feedback. We haven't had a single Ofsted in the last few years in East Sussex without outstanding for leadership, outstanding for behaviour, and so on and so forth. Like all our schools are good and outstanding. and they weren't. They were measures and stuff. And we delivered this without the data to Ofsted, in 2 Ofsteds in the new framework within the first year of it coming out, like that first year. And we were sitting there with rubbish summative data because it's kind of legacy data of previous schools, but they weren't interested in that. And what they saw in the classrooms, they were interested in, and that actually just it makes them feel better. Like you can do this, and people think it's, people see what it is. I can go, that's all right. That seems to work for kids, and I can see where that's going to get them. So I can see what's happening in the classrooms at the moment. There you go.
You're doing visits certainly in the autumn term. People
We've got, booked up. I put them on. We put them on Twitter, and then they got snapped in right away 3 seconds. And you can only do so many, but we'll do some more. I think I'm doing a talk for. So this is the first time I've talked about this, really. But I'm gonna, because obviously I want to do it with you, Kieran. But I think I'm going to do a proper presentation for challenge partners. They've asked. They came to me, definitely for East Sussex Local Authority, because they came to us to ask us to speak. And I think I'll do something. It's quite hard now because we run a teaching hub, but I'm going to try and make time to definitely do something for Mark and the maths conferences, and so where I can this year, I'm going to try and sort of talk about this again, with some visual aids, which is kind of useful. But I kind of feel it right to be here first because I've chatted to you about maths for a number of years, and so it's nice to sort of talk about it here first. So we're going to try and make it as available as possible for people, to listen to and unpick. And I think probably I tend to ramble quite a lot, and slides tend to focus me. So we try and fight. I'll tweet when I'm doing something that's got slides, and it'll probably make a bit more sense, and I'll be a bit more concise. But this is the first pass, isn't it? So this is the rambly version. I'll do a better version in the future.
I think you're being too modest. There wasn't much of a ramble there. It was all very, very. I said in the book, absolute gold, and I reckon this is just as much. It's been a fascinating chat, an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for joining me, Matt.
No worries, man. Have a great summer, Mr. Kieran. It's been good. Yeah, thank you very much. Sorry, it's been quite long, so apologies to listeners, but I hope you find it interesting.
No.
You can just email me if you've got any questions or you want to visit all stuff. Then just at Matt Swain 36. Forget my own Twitter thing, and just DM me if you want, and I'll do what I can.